Good morning, everyone. We now reach the day two of the lecture with Professor Niraj Kumar.
So I think we now know each other.
Yes, sir.
Is there anything else you are supposed to say?
The title of the lecture is Hegel, Dialectics and Emergence of Physics. Thank you.
So obligated to know that. Thank you. Thank you. Okay. So it would be an exaggeration to say that Hegel perhaps is the most important philosopher we have ever seen, and it is because of reasons and all this. You can see in it short. And as I earlier also suggested that if you think that Kant was complex, and if you put Kant on the scale of in case of complexity at somewhere at 5 out of 10, and 1 being least, 0 being least, and 10 being most, so Hegel would be somewhere near 10. So that is what Hegel is. And many times Hegel is almost impenetrable. There are certain certain verses of Hegel, you can just keep on struggling with those verses without understanding what Hegel intends to do. Some of the critiques of Hegel actually end up saying that he has done that on purpose. That would be too much to blame, but there are certain critiques of Hegel that say that it appears that he wants to make himself much more complex on purpose. But again, it comes from this basic idea which I have talked about in the context of Kant also. That is, Hegel was again a professor at university, and the way academia writes things is different from what other people write. So there is an inherent complexity in the way people talk about Kant's ideas. And the second thing was that Hegel was extraordinarily ambitious with respect to his theory. So as we have discussed, so to know Hegel, as we have said in the context of, as we have done in context of Kant also, it would help if we know briefly from where Hegel was coming and what he intended to do. Again, it is not surprising that Hegel was also coming from a family, a Protestant family, which was a very believing family. Rather, they had to leave their parental home because of fear of persecution from Catholics. So he came and settled. His family came and settled. Now Hegel actually, it was a large family. As it is not extraordinary because most of initial Christian families were actually large families and all this, and you know the reasons because of all this, the idea of life and the idea that there should not be any artificial means to actually stop conceiving and all those kind of things. So the basic proposition which will arise in all these circumstances is this, that not necessarily they will get the attention which a small family will get, the child in a small family will get. And Hegel was much closer to his mother than father. His father was a small-time civil servant, not holding a very high position, so they were not the people who were in resources and all that. And it's said, although anecdotally only because there is not much evidence available with respect to that Hegel's mother was, for her times, was extraordinarily well educated. But as I said, that is just anecdotal evidence, not much. And it is also suggested that Hegel was closer to his father. And during his young, kind of a very not young, rather childhood, Hegel and his mother both suffered from a fever. If I remember correctly, it was something called gall fever or something like that. And his mother could not survive. He survived. And Hegel, it appears not many people say that Hegel struggled with this kind of guilt conscience that we both suffer from the same thing and I could survive and my mother didn't survive. And a lot many people say that led to some complexities in this heart process. Hegel, as was supposed to be, given the family background, he was again supposed to become and get the training in religious instructions and all this. He went to Birmingham for those purposes. He was studying there, but Hegel was a difficult character. He was penalized many times for coming that late. Known to give so many excuses and all those kind of things. He was not doing things in a manner that was supposed to be done for a person who was supposed to be a religious instructor in future. But he stayed there in England and all this, and he learned all those kind of ideas. And Hegel, an extraordinarily bright person he was, a very well read. If there is something called well read, Hegel will qualify that category as well. He was a man of letters, he was very widely read, not only in a particular area. He read science, theology, and all those kind of things, of course, basic history and all those kind of ideas. So Hegel was a very widely read person, and that is reflected in his work also. And that is, you'll find that it appears that he has a good knowledge of everything. Now, in the initial period, he was, as I was saying, that he was very youthful exuberance was there. He was a very sharp and bright person, and he was in company of two very great people. So one happened to be the most famous poet of German Romanticism. Another was a philosopher who got his name much before Hegel was known to the world, that is Shelley. And Hegel was also known for his too much of drinking habits and all this kind of thing. His friend actually once said it to him that whatever little philosophy is left in you, that will die because of your drinking habits and all this. And Hegel, actually from 1801, he has been promising his publisher that I will write something, and he didn't produce anything for another 5-6 years. And in 1805, his publisher actually gave an ultimatum, and which ended up in him producing in the month of October of 1806, Phenomenology of the Spirit, which we call as young Hegelian ideas. It appears to be a very incoherent. If you look for a symmetry in the book, there is complete lack of symmetry. It appears that is whatever is coming to his mind here and there, little skeleton is writing there. So there is complete lack of symmetry in all this. It may be because of the reason that he was struggling against time and all this. And the legend has it that on the fateful night of 2013 of October 1806, when he was actually writing the final chapter of his book, Napoleon army actually invaded Russia, and Hegel was actually very much influenced by Napoleon and all this. And I quote one verse of Hegel, which actually Hegel wrote in the context of Napoleon and all this. He said that I saw the emperor, that world soul, riding out to reconnoiter the city. It is truly a wonderful sensation to see such an individual concentrated here on a single point, astride a single horse, yet reaching across the world and ruling it. It actually betrays his subsequent ideas also, that is, he also in a way aspired to be like Napoleon, that is, with single-minded and dogged purpose, that I will give a theory which will be applicable and which will take care of the problems of philosophy at that point. So, although it is tragic that in another week or so, the place where he was living, Napoleon army actually destroyed. So that was a fact. But going back to the other historical context in which he was writing, so we see that by this time we had people like Hume, Locke, and all those kind of people about whom we were talking about. We were talking about empiricism. Okay? That is through senses and all those kind of things. And Hegel was coming after Immanuel Kant, and that's why Kant was also there, who was not talking about senses and all those kind of things. He was talking about something which is within yourself. So, and then by this time there was this not much of influence of French Revolution. So, although none of the proponents of French Revolution ever became a great philosopher. None of them were great philosophers. They were actually not even referred as philosophers. They were referred as philosophers. Okay? So they were the people actually who were having this idea that human being has been suffering and human species have been suffering because of the fact that there has been prejudice among the people, and this prejudice has been participated because of vested interest. Vested interest of the state, vested interest of the church, and so on and so forth. And that's why we have to destroy. And that's why you find that French Revolution was a very problematic revolution. At the end of the day, it actually ended up killing the people who actually provided foundation for French Revolution, also ideological foundation. So it was a revolution which actually, as we say in the context, perhaps nothing can be more truer than this kind of truism, that is, as we always say, that revolution devotes its own child. Nothing can be, this age, if it is there, perhaps nothing, it is very much applicable with the French Revolution. It ended up so much so that the last of the philosophical basis which was coming from consent, he was also actually followed, he tried to hide, and he was about to be killed, and God knows he actually died when he was apprehended. Not many people say that he died because of heart attack, and some of them actually say that he died because of poison. So that's why the whole idea was such that everything is problematic, and we'll have to actually see reason and all those kind of things. And there is a power structure which is trying to perpetuate itself, and this power structure has to be destroyed. So that was the idea. Now this was also, so this idea, what we can call, for the sake of power, simplicity, an idea of a world of reason. That is, French Revolution emphasized a lot on reason. That is, we'll have to see the reason. And only through the reason, enlightenment can come and all those kind of things. Although enlightenment had been an idea prior to that. But for French Revolution, everything was a miasma because of the vested interest. So whatever we saw was not the real thing. It was either because of the fact that somebody was there. And that's why there was a distrust towards philosophers also. Because the idea was such that these are the people who have actually justified all those kind of prejudices. And one cannot be wrong beyond a point. One can always argue that it is going too far to say that they actually intended to defend for the heck of defending. But we know, as a matter of fact, Hobbes was treated as a defender of state. Similarly, rather the defender of king himself. Similarly, Locke and all those kind of people. So in a way, this perception could have been easily created. That these are the people who actually have vested interest because they want to preserve the power structure and so on and so forth. So that was the idea which was there. And Hegel was coming after all this. So he had all this with him. That is, he was supposed to deal with empiricism, he was supposed to deal with the senses, he was supposed to deal with the, something which is internal to the human thing, what in sense of Kant we can call as the pure reason or will of an individual. And also with respect to this idea of French Revolution, where reason was actually thought about. And in case of Hegel, Hegel was interesting in the sense that he changed everything without changing anything. And that may sound to be paradoxical, but if you actually try to understand Hegel, that is something which Hegel always argued for. And that is not extraordinary, as we'll see in a short while. That is why Hegel appears to be such a momentous phenomena. But if you actually try to understand Hegel, Hegel never ever tried to say that I am doing something which is extraordinarily new. Never ever said and all those kind of things. And then that's why you find not much continuity from Descartes, even Plato. So you can find a lot much of continuity in Hegel's ideas, starting from the time of Plato himself. So that is what is there. And he was also influenced by what we said in the previous context, romanticism and all those kind of things. And nature was becoming important and all those kind of things. And sometimes you find that Hegel was talking about something which Wordsworth was talking about. And I quote this words of Wordsworth, which in a way influenced Hegel's processes also, and will also keep on coming back to all these ideas. So I quote this Wordsworth writing: "One impulse from a vernal wood may teach you more of a man of moral evil and of good than all sages can." So that's why the nature also had some central idea, so far as Hegelian idea is conceived. Now, the idea of Hegel was that Hegel was talking about what we can call as a totalizing philosophy. That everything and anything has to be covered in that idea. It is not that something can be left beyond this idea, and then in a way there was no silos for Hegel. So the idea is this, that by same processes nature can be understood, by same processes physics can be also understood. So just think about Kant and all those kind of people. That is, they were the people who were actually trying to struggle with, or even Hume and all those kind of people, Newtonian mechanics, that is physics and all those kind of ideas and how to deal with all this. By this time for Hegel, when Hegel was working, biology as a science was also developing. Okay? It was also making its presence felt. And that's why you'll find that this idea of organism and organicism is again finding reflection in Hegel's work. Okay? So that is there. Now again, I'll quote something which is paraphrasing of work of Zizek. So if you want to understand Hegel, I'll urge that try following Slovak Zizek on this. That is Sharing with Time and Less Than Nothing. These are the two works of Zizek which will help you in understanding Hegel and all this. But statutory wording, that is, both of them are not easily, that is there. I'll just paraphrase this certain things which is really coming from Zizek. That is, the empiricist and Kant declared that metaphysics is impossible. That's why, just to recall, in the previous talk when I was talking about Immanuel Kant, I also was talking about Hume. He said that metaphysics is dead. Okay? So that is, these are the people they were talking about that metaphysics is dead. And that was something which was also Immanuel Kant to that extent. That is, whatever is there is within you. There is nothing beyond that and all those kind of ideas. This idea that metaphysics is impossible. What route, if any, to a metaphysics of total human experience is open, then to Hegel in this situation? Okay, that is the question. The Kantian turn in philosophy had given primacy to mind, if you recall. That is, this thinking process, not the senses. So whatever is the construct is what is created in the mind. So it's not like Hume and all those kind of people who are talking about that hammer is an experience. If you recall the example which I gave, that hammer is an experience. But for Immanuel Kant, hammer is not an experience, it is a construct of your mind. Okay? It is not an experience in the sense that that is there. Okay? So that is what is there. Now, in this context, what Hegel has to do, that is, Kant has given primacy to mind, had made mind the lawgiver to nature, such that whatever we know is in part due to our own concepts. But Kant had placed severe limitations on these concepts. To construct through these concepts a metaphysics which seeks knowledge of total reality is almost impossible. So if you try to develop Immanuel Kant for the purposes of thinking about the total reality, it would be almost impossible. Okay? So against this, Hegel was trying to do. Now, as I already suggested, that for Hegel it is quite obvious that metaphysics is possible. Okay? So Hegel accepted from Kant the primacy of the mind's concepts in determining what we know. That is one. But he had three objections to Kant's restrictions on the pure concepts. He refused any limitation on the number of concepts. Or if you recall that Immanuel Kant was very monolithic. That is one concept and all those kind of things. Hegel was not willing to accept this, that there is only one concept. There can be multiplicity of concepts. He refused any limitation on the number of the concepts. Second, he refused to limit them to using sensory experience. There is only sensory experience. And third, Hegel refused to limit the knowledge gained by the categories to the status of mere appearances. He argued that the categories do pertain to reality. It is reality itself which this concept tells us about. Okay. So that is what Hegel is talking about. And now from here, Hegel talks about what we call as dialectics. Okay. Now, although whenever we talk about dialectics, generally it is most of the times it is perpetuated as if Hegel was the person who created dialectics. Hegel was not the person who created dialectics for the first time. You clearly find Plato is talking about dialectics and so on. So there has been a tradition. Socrates, Plato, and all those people has been talking about dialectics. So Hegel was not the first person who created this idea of dialectics and all this. So in that context, as a matter of fact, that is one of the things. If you talk to anyone about Hegel, what do you mean by Hegel? Something will come up. Yes, what it could be? If you're supposed to talk about Hegel, what will you say? What Hegel will?
Because it's about the state of mind where we discuss majorly about thesis, antithesis, and synthesis.
Yeah.
It's a process where we can have like different opinion, and then we can encounter and we can produce a new version. So we define and justify the slavery and the master relationship within the society, societal perspective we can have. When we just see this as a societal perspective, then we can define slavery and the master.
So slavery in the context of that is prior to all this, that is master slavery. Master slavery listening derived from nature, that is any nature there are entities who try to slave other entities and so on and so forth, and then we also tend to participate in ideas and all. And on that basis develop. So essentially, for the purpose of understanding Hegel, of course, that is something which is clearly talked about by the Hegel, that is thesis, antithesis, and ultimate synthesis. But the more important thing about Hegel is that he talks in the context of triads. Okay? That is this idea of triazing the things and all those kind of ideas. So that is what Hegel is talking about. So if you actually understand Hegel, there is a continuity with respect to all those things. So Hegel is not saying that whatever has been said prior to the new understanding was useless and of no use, and that is what the existing ideas are, and that is what in Hegelian terms would be the idea of thesis. But by its very nature, thesis per se is not something which has existed as such. So thesis, in a way, is also an idea of synthesis. Okay? Because thesis is created because of a synthesis. So in a way, if you are trying to understand in that context, there are not three things, actually there are four things, which is creating a triage. That because thesis per se is a synthesis. Okay? And this idea of challenging that is in the form of an antithesis to that idea and all those kind of thing. It may appear to be coming from a different side, but it is not so alien to the whole idea. So this reasoning of antithesis is also within that thesis itself. Okay? And that's why this idea of ultimate reconciliation is there, and which ends up creating what we call as a new thesis, which we call as synthesis. Okay? So this synthesis actually results into a new thesis. So the whole thesis is displaced by a new thesis. And that's why, for understanding of Hegel, of course we emphasize thesis, antithesis and synthesis a lot. But it's very important to understand this more of a triage rather than anything else. Okay? That is, he's trying to talk about this tree. And that is something which we will subsequently say in the context of state also. He will have this kind of triage. Okay? So that is what is central with respect to Hegelian ideas. We will find that he is talking in the terms of triages. Okay? So that is there. Now, in a way, the synthesis can not result in a new synthesis or a new thesis cannot be there unless until there is a negation and sublation. And that's why this idea that if you go to the biblical garden and all this idea that the existence of God actually depended upon this idea that human being asserted something which was against the God. Okay? So this irony in Hegelian irony, that negation of God is actually the recognition of the God. Okay? That is, you negate God and that is the recognition of the God. Till the time you are one and same, there is no God. Okay? So the negation of God creates God. Okay? On the face of it, it appears to be contradictory. But in Hegelian terms, it is not contradictory because of the fact that unless until you do that, there is no existence by the name of God.
Can we understand it as negation of negation?
That would be, of course, creation of a new idea. Negation of negation. Because ultimately, sublation will result in negation of negation. Okay? So, that is an idea. So, this is something which Hegel will talk about. And again, read something. Now, we have the kind of a basic diagram of Hegel's theory of dialectic. but it's very important to understand that how this dialectic is different from other ideas. So for Hegelian dialectic is a process which consists of three stages or movements. For this reason, Hegel's theory of dialectic is called in Hegelian terms triadic. Okay? The process of dialectic moves from a first stage or movement that we call as thesis to the second stage or movement, which negates, opposes or contradicts the first, the antithesis. And this opposition is overcome by third stage, in which a new concept, the synthesis, emerges as a higher truth, which transcends them. So synthesis has these three functions, and that is important to understand. It cancels the conflict between thesis and antithesis. Unless until that conflict is sorted out, there cannot be synthesis. So that's why I said that thesis and antithesis appears to be conflicting, but synthesis cannot be created unless until you cancel this conflict. Okay? So there is a necessary requirement of cancelling of this conflict. Secondly, it preserves or retains the element of truth within the thesis and antithesis, and that's why it is very important to understand that. That's why he said that Hegel is very much clear about this. Every previous development, even if it is appearing to be a case of sublation, but that is not denied. It is very much part and parcel of all this idea, and that's why he talked about organicism. That is, there is an organic growth and all this, and all those kind of ideas, which influence Marx also, and I will quote subsequently that idea also. And the third thing, it transcends the opposition and raises up or sublimates the conflict into a higher truth. Okay? So these are the three stages which are very important for the purpose of understanding of this synthesis. Okay? So I repeat it. It cancels the conflict between thesis and antithesis. Secondly, it preserves or retains the element of truth within the thesis and antithesis. And thirdly, it transcends the opposition and raises up or sublimates the conflict into a higher truth. Okay? So that is there. And in that context, let me quote the Hegel's word. It says, so he is trying to create a metaphor out of blossoming of flower and all, and fruit and all. So he says, and I quote, the bird disappears when the blossom breaks through. And we might say that the former is refuted by the latter. In the same way, when the fruit comes, the blossom may be explained to be false form of the plant's existence. For the fruit appears as its true nature in the place of blossom. But the ceaseless activity of their own inherent nature makes them at the same time movements of an organic unity, where they not merely do not contradict one another, but where one is as necessary as the other. And this equal necessity of all movements constitutes thereby the life of the whole. But contradiction as between philosophic system is not wont to be conceived in this way. Okay? So the idea is this, that it is not that as if every other process which has happened loses its significance just because of the fact that ultimate purpose of this was to germinate it into a fruit. And that's why all those processes which were prior to it becoming a fruit were useless processes. Okay? That is what Hegel is clearly talking about. And that's why it is not that when he talks about absolute truth and all those kind of ideas and on all those kind of idea. So when he talk about thesis, antithesis, synthesis, and then there is the idea of whole. Okay? So this thesis, antithesis, and a synthesis is there as a triadic idea, but there is this idea of a whole. So this whole is also very important for the purposes of Hegelian understanding. Not only this triadic, this idea of a whole, that is thesis, antithesis, synthesis, and then there is something called whole. Okay? And that is what Hegel is also talking about. And that's why the most kind of prominent disciple, not in a formal sense of disciple, but in the sense of disciple of Hegel, Karl Marx, was also talking about something like that. And that's why for Karl Marx, a lot of times people think as if Karl Marx was talking about communism in isolation. For Karl Marx, communism was a byproduct of capitalism only. unless and until there is a capitalism, there is no idea of communism as such. Okay? So communism is dependent upon capitalism as such. Okay? Because there cannot be a class as an idea, unless, so class was a construct which was created by capitalism only. So prior to capitalism, there was no class as such, in the Marxian sense. There was no such class. And that's why this idea, and Marx was quite clear, that communism is a fruition of capitalism, in the same way as we were talking about blossoming of fruit and all this. And that's why, as a matter of fact, I don't know whether you know about this or not, some of the people actually when approached Marx, that is, let us introduce communism in Russia and all those kind of places, which subsequently became USSR and all this, Karl Marx was completely against this. Because for Karl Marx, unless and until capitalism completely exploits its potential, there is no possibility of communism as such. And that's why Karl Marx was clear that if at all communism has to be experimented with at this stage, it is only England and Germany which can experiment with communism. Because this was a kind of a stage-wise development. So there cannot be a fruit unless until there is all the processes which goes on and creates a fruit. You cannot say in isolation that ultimately since we are interested in fruit, let us have fruit. It will not make any sense in dialectical materialism of Karl Marx and Hegel. Because this is a process through which ultimately you can have this idea of, so that way communism is a fruition of capitalism. Okay? And that's why Karl Marx was clearly against introduction of communism in all those countries where there is no fruition of complete exploitation of potential of capitalism. Okay? In this case, one can call as a surplus which is getting created and so on and so forth. Okay? So that's why that is another problem that most of the Marxists have not read Marx. That is another problem. And that's why Marx actually distinguishes between Marxian and Marxist. Okay? These are two categories. One claims to know Marx, other actually know Marx. Okay? So that is there. And I've seen a lot of my friends who claim to be Marxists have not read even the first two chapters of Karl Marx. Perhaps they are very different. Unless until you have a very high order understanding of mathematics, you won't be able to make sense of first chapter of last chapter of Karl Marx. So that is there. So in a way, that's why Karl Marx is following Hegelian idea. That is, there is a natural process through which, and that's why when I was talking about poem and all those kind of thing of Wordsworth and all this, that was a context. That there is a phenomena through which all those kind of thing has to happen, and only after all those processes we can think about something what we call as dialectical materialism in that sense. He also talked about Plato's idea and all this. So again, let me explain this, and this would be a little bit more detailed reading and all this. So if you compare Hegel's theory of dialectic with that of Plato, we find some striking differences. Whereas for Plato, dialectic in a kind of an highest form of knowledge. Okay? So has as goal the removal of contradictions. So if you see kind of Socrates and Plato and all those kind of earlier philosophers, I hope that all of us actually know about that metaphorical philosopher king. I hope that all of us have this idea of philosopher king. So you are in a cave or a well, and it is an illusion, reality is outside somewhere. Okay? And then you have to travel from there, see from above all this, and then only you can have a better vision of everything of this. This is what they are talking about. But for Hegel, truth is very much here. There is nothing out there. Okay? So in a way, Plato and Socrates dialectic is this idea that there is illusion, and there is truth. Okay? So unless until you see outside, you won't be able to see the truth. Something like, I don't know how many of you have actually watched the movie Matrix. Okay? So you remember there were two pills in Matrix? They were choice. Okay? Either will you break from slumber and see the reality, or will remain in illusion. Okay? There are no two pills for Hegel, okay? Which was there. For all these ancient philosophers and all those kind of people. That is, you are here, this is a world of illusion. To make sense of all this, you'll have to see it from outside. Okay? Unless until you see from outside, you won't be able to make sense of things and all this. For Hegel, everything is here. There is nothing out there to actually see. Everything is here only, and that is what you are supposed to, and this is through which you are supposed to achieve what we call as cunning of reason. Okay? That is, do you have any idea that why he calls it a cunning of reason? Cunning of reason is a phenomenon which comes quite often. And contain ideas and so many other ideas. Okay, so I will come to cunning of reason subsequently. If I forget, do remind me, because that is very important. What am I supposed to see?
11, 15 minutes.
Okay, 11, 15 minutes. Only 15 minutes. Okay, so for Hegel, contradiction can never be overcome. Okay. For Plato, contradiction has to be overcome. For Hegel, contradiction can never be overcome. That is something which Hegel is clear about. So the generating of contradiction of opposites and their synthesis in Hegel's view, the very nature of rational thought and thus of reality itself. Okay. So it is very much between. There is nothing something out and you can overcome and go there. There is nothing to go there. So there is no possibility of contradiction being overcome. Okay. So that is an idea. For Plato, dialectic ends the immutable. Okay. Dialectic results into something immutable. Static truth of the forms. For Hegel, dialectic ends the dynamically changing truths of the concepts. Okay. There is nothing called static truth for Hegel. That is, truth will remain one. Although, and that is why it is ironical, absolute truth he talks about, and that's why he wanted to introduce cunning of reason, which is shortly, of course, I have to introduce that, otherwise it will not make sense. But this is very important to understand. When he talks about absolute truth, that doesn't mean truth is static. Okay? Because that is one of the obvious paradoxes which may appear. Because the idea when we talk about absolute truth, there is a propensity that we can move in direction of either Plato or Immanuel Kant kind of idea that there is an absolute truth. It will not change because of scenarios, changing scenario, changing context. Whereas Hegel is a person who is very much a contextual person. And that's why Hegel, and that's why when I started with Hegel, I talked about all the previous development which was influencing Hegel. And Hegel was not a person who denounced anything. He was not doing what Immanuel Kant did, that he will completely discredit David Hume and all those kind of ideas, that is, senses are nothing. We are not sensory perceptions, and we are not, and our actions are not decided on the basis of as if you are a bundle of nerves only. Okay? That is not what Hegel is trying to do. Hegel is using all the previous philosophers for the purpose of developing his theory. Okay? So what he believes in, what he talks about, he actually believes. So he is doing synthesis for himself also. Okay? So he is not trying to say like, okay, Descartes was one, he was someone else, and then French rationalists are someone else, and then I am someone, I'm trying to do something completely new. His new is not something which is not getting influenced by what is happening prior to. Okay? And that's why that is what is very important to understand. And that's why, unlike Plato, Hegel will not say that once you resolve the contradiction, there is truth, and you see the truth. Okay? For him, resolution of contradiction can result into something, some synthesis and an ultimate thesis for a time being, but truth is never static. And that's why this idea of absolute truth becomes a little bit paradoxical, and that in that context, cunning of reason and owl of Minerva, which actually ultimate termination of Hegel would be into a mature Hegel and all this, makes sense. But this idea, that is, it is not supposed to be complete. So it is, for Hegel, dialectic is the dynamically changing truths of the concept. Hegel offers us a view of dialectical reasons moving dynamically through tension, opposite conflicts, polarity, contradiction, towards resolution in a synthesis. Hegel's view of dialectical reason is distinct from Plato's reason, which grasps the pure form in their identity and their interrelatedness. That is it. Third, For Plato, dialectic is forms or ideas which are rational and timeless, derived not from the visible but from the intelligible world, and represent a transcendent realm of truth. But for Hegel, conceptual truth is immanent in immanent things, in the changing processes of the world and time bound. Then does it not follow that absolute mind consisting of conceptual truth is not a transcendent realm of truth, but is merely tied to, immanent in changing processes of truth and to the time? How then can Hegel refer to absolute mind as God? That is what Hegel refers to as. Absolute mind is like God, omniscient, knowing everything and all those kind of ideas. Or as totality. So, that is there. So, let me briefly in that context introduce this idea of absolute mind, that is what he is talking about, and maybe a little bit of cunning of reason. So, generally what we assume is this, that we consciously reason out, and through deliberative processes, we come to a conclusion. For Hegel, that reason is self-perpetuating. It is not controlled by you. And that's why it is cunning of reason. It actually makes itself visible in a particular context at a particular point. That may not be the complete story. That is the story at that point of time. So, it is the reason which is controlling you rather than you controlling the deliberative processes of the reason. And that's why this idea coming of reason. This reason controls how you think and how you come to a particular propositions and all those kind of things. And that's why it will keep on making itself visible from time to time. Okay? And that's why this idea of absolute truth is there. But to the extent it actually makes itself known at that point of time, is very contextual. Okay? That is an idea. And that's why this absolute truth and this cunning of reason has to be understood together. That is, and that's why the term cunning of reason. Rather than you reasoning out, it is the reason which is making you understand certain things. And that's why it is the cunning of reason. So the reason controls the things, rather than you controlling the reason and all those kind of ideas. And that's why it is like God. Okay? Whereas God may know certain things, God may know everything, but at a particular point of time, you don't know what is the ultimate story of the God and what is the complete and total story of the God. Okay? And that's why it reconciles the seeming conflict between this Hegelian idea, that is absolute truth, and this idea that it is changing over a period of time because of the context. Because what you are getting is an excess at a particular point of time. Okay? So that's why this absolute truth is like God, and we may not know the whole truth at a particular point. Okay? And that is the whole idea in which actually Hegel talks about this. So now another thing that I have, so let me introduce certain things about Hegel which actually allow certain people to use Hegel in a problematic manner. That is, we know Hitler actually, it is suggested that the Third Reich was made possible because of Hegelian reasons. Okay? That is the context and this objective spirit and all those kind of idea which Hegel was talking about. The society talks about the objective spirit. That is another problem. With respect to the proposition when you talk about objective spirit or Savigny's false test. Please mind it, Hegel is a very historical person. He is not ahistorical. Okay? He is very much a historical person. He takes into account the history and the development of all this thing. Hegelian idea is not ahistorical, it is very much historical. So as is that idea, that is when we talk about general will of Savigny and all those kind of people, general will is never aggregation of individual wills. That is one of the wrong conceptions you should always have. As if the general will is just aggregation of individual will. So the society general will is not something which can be formed by as if you are putting everything to the back. General will is already there, and you are supposed to discover it. Okay? Something like that when you have a constitution and a constitutional movement, you have this idea that what we want to be as a society. So this foundational constituent movement will tell you that what we stand as a society. Or to use another German philosopher and extraordinary constitutional jurist by the name of Carl Schmitt, who again because of this movement of indiscretion became a pariah for a long period of time. He was considered a very dangerous philosopher to be taught to the college-going students for law because, and to a certain extent, he has to be blamed for all this also because he officially joined NSDAP, that is the Nazi party. He became an official member of that party for around 4 years in a very active manner. And that's why he was, although he was not an official philosopher of Hitler, there was someone else who was an official philosopher, not Carl Schmitt. But he ended up talking about something similar to that when he was talking about political unity. That is, at the time of formation of political unity, there are contradicting views, but once you form that political unity, subsequent to this political unity, till the time this constitution and state is there, it is not subject to different interpretations. So that's why this objective spirit is not a spirit as if on the day-to-day basis you are supposed to discover it. As a society, it is a societal construct. You know what is an objective spirit. And that is what you are supposed to think about. That what is the objective spirit. So on that basis of objective spirit, you can deal with, once you understand this, then you cannot use Hegel for the purpose of doing what Hitler was doing, or at least, to that extent, nobody can say that if you criticize state, then you are anti-Hegel. Because ultimately, because of the fact that Hegel was talking about that how to discover all this spirit, so he was saying that the first unit would be family. Okay? In case of family, also was clearly clear that if husband and wife have different ideas, children have different ideas about what this family stands for, then this family is just going to collapse. So unless until you have one idea about what this family stands for, there is an objective spirit with respect to this understanding of what this family stands for. This family cannot serve. Now from this family you move to what we call as civil society. And please understand that civil society was not the civil society as we understand today. NGOs and all this kind of ideas. Civil society was in a sense larger group. Okay? And the ultimate grouping was state. Okay? And within the state, in a way, there was a sublation of everything else. So the family, civil society, and the state. So the state is the ultimate reality for the objective state. Okay? But the state, it is very important to understand. The state is not the personification of sovereign at a particular point of time. Okay? So a particular leader at a particular point of time can very well go against this idea of objective spirit of the state. So that's why when you say that Hitler is doing something wrong, or some college students are criticizing American assault on Vietnam during Vietnamese War, you are not being anti-Hitler. Because then you are arguing this act is not the state as we understand. Okay? So this state is an objective spirit. It is not that everything that state does is right. So state or the instrumentality of the state can also violate this objective spirit of the state. So that way, it is wrong to assume that once the state is there, that becomes an ultimate reality, and anything done in the name of the state is justifiable on Hegelian terms. And that's why it was a distortion and this use of Hegel if someone is trying to justify what Hitler was doing. Okay? So you can very well criticize Vietnam War without being anti-Hegel. Okay? So Hegel was clear. Rather, Hegel, when he was talking to his daughter, it is recorded that he was suggesting that the worst kind of thing which I can imagine for a human being is servitude. So Hegel was never promoting servitude. Okay. A lot many times Hegelian idea, people think that promotes servitude, that is anything but Hegel. Hegel was never promoting servitude and things like that. I have given a very simplistic, very reductionist idea of Hegel and all this, but I hope that something is there what Hegel and all this. So now let's use.
So, regarding cunning of reason, from what I could gather, is this an improvement on Platonic idea of the contradiction, where in the realm of contradiction it can be resolved only by arbitrary action or arbitrary interference, as we saw in the allegory of cave? Is this an improvement? Is Hegel is trying to improve upon this particular position of Plato through cunning of reason?
So, as I said, that unlike Plato, Hegel is not looking for a static truth. For Plato, the problem is there because of the fact that Plato is clear that truth is out there. So, it is your duty to actually achieve that. Because you are living in a world of illusion and truth is out there. So, it is your deficiency which is not allowing you to settle the contradictions. And ultimately you do that. Once you do that, it becomes immutable. It will not change, it will remain static. For Hegel, that is not an idea at all. For Hegel, is the idea that through this reason, the process of truth is discovered. Although it is an absolute truth, but the whole truth is never ever known to anyone at any point of time. And that's why it is a process through which, and that's why I said, he was an organicist much before not many of other people were. And that's why I read his portion where he is trying to compare it with the ultimate culmination into fruit. So all those processes are important, things will keep on changing. But the idea is this, that you did not go out there to do something. And that's why he said that he is also synthesizing Kant within himself. Okay? So to that extent, he is also talking about will. Okay? And that's why Hegel is everyone. There is no complete break, as was the case with Immanuel Kant. Immanuel Kant was a complete break. He was just trying to denounce. So if you agree with Immanuel Kant, Hume cannot survive. Because he is saying something just opposite to the Hume. He is not British empiricist, which Hume and all Locke and all those kind of people were. He is clearly someone different. Hegel is empiricist. Hegel is talking about will. Hegel is talking about reason. Hegel is talking about everything else. So he's learning from everyone. Yeah.
My question is something about which you touched at the end of the talk about the Hegel's idea of spirit. So I would like you to reiterate the again here this idea of spirit, which it calls as Dialectics, the ethical life. I want to understand this in the context of modern state, or in the context of the idea of punishment and modern state.
So for Hegelian modern state, it is a very contextual model. It is not a Kantian idea of anything. So what Americans will do with themselves, it is none of the business of an Indian to decide upon how Americans have organized themselves as a society. There is only a universal truth in that sense. Okay? It is a societal construct in that sense. So what Americans stand for, it is for the American as a society to reconcile. As is the case with even what is good for one family may not be good for another family. And you cannot judge the spirit of this family in the light of the spirit of the other family. So there won't be that model state for Hegel in that sense. There can be multiple truths. There is not one truth in that sense. And that's why he said there is a contradiction. And how can absolute truth be multiple truths?
Actually,
Can I answer your question?
Yeah, I mean, I have a lot of follow-up questions. Can we relate this idea to the current world order or the new world order?
What is current world order and what is new world order?
Again, I have a lot of questions.
we can think. So I was thinking about the dialectics and the possibility of science. Because our science try to remove contradictions. And any contradiction in science means science is not possible. Because science requires objectivity, and objectivity requires elimination of contradictions. Hegel is saying contradiction is required, because without contradiction you cannot move, you cannot progress. So in Hegelian culture, how is it possible to develop objective science is the biggest challenge. That is the one thing. And second thing is Hegelian philosophy.
Let me again clarify one thing. Something being a challenge doesn't mean it is impossible. And that's why Hegel is an extraordinary project. And that's why Hegel is intimidating. Something which is impossible, which is not appearing to be, which is appearing to be difficult is not impossible. Because for Hegel, Hegel is a kind of complete unity of disciplines. It is not thinking in science. Complete unity of discipline. It may be difficult at a particular point of time, but it is not impossible. It is Hegelian project. That is, you are supposed to find it. And we find it in the sense that you will know it.
So we can have a science consisting of.
And that is the last stage with respect to all of Minerva and all this.
All the contradictions to be assimilated, or contradiction will keep unfolding. That is the one thing. Second thing is Hegel was the philosopher of history, or you can say he developed philosophy of history. And in that philosophy of history, what we find that Hegel, through sublation and developing synthesis, trying to achieve higher truth again and again, and those theses and antitheses are overpowered by synthesis in the sublation process. In this process, what we find, there is the development of history, which we call progressive history. And in that progressive history, we find the narrative of primitive versus progressive, that idea what Condorcet called, that Western civilization had achieved the progress what the primitive could not. And so in that sense, they rationalize colonial practices in doing philosophy of history. And saying that history is very progressive, because it is achieving new reality and overpowering previous reality through this dialectical process. That's the biggest challenge, don't you think, sir, that Hegelian history presents to us?
So Hegel was not actually talking about the project of liberalism as such. Neither Immanuel Kant was talking about nor Hegel was talking about. So I don't think Hegel would be much worried about all this. But in different contexts, in a historical context, of course, one has to agree what we call as, in the liberal terminology, the idea of what meliorism. That is, every subsequent generation is better equipped than the previous one. But he will not be talking about what Dinesh Chakravarti calls as, in the case of colonial history, that waiting room of history. That is what white man's burden is. That ultimately, as all justifier of colonialism was saying, that we are there for benign purposes. Actually, you are not there where you should be. So we are here to help you to be there. Okay? And that's why Dinesh Chakravarti calls it as a waiting room of history. Okay? Ultimately, you will go there and we will help you to be there. Once you are there, we will leave it to yourself. Okay? And of course, this whole idea of Hobbesian logic of state and all those kind of things, that what is the alternate of all this? Alternate of all this is anarchy, not much of other problems and all this. So order can be restored only if we are there. Okay, so we are doing good to you. Okay? And of course, that's why Gandhi was a challenge for all of this. Because Gandhi clearly said that even if there is anarchy, leave it to ourselves. We don't give it. Okay? So the whole logical state was derived by Gandhi. But Hegel is not talking about all those kind of things. In the sense that ultimately you are supposed to be there and all those kind of things. So this very in a way is a social construct in that sense. So every society will have its own ideas with respect to how to regulate their own affairs and all. So there won't be what John Rawls can talk about, and that's why he started with. He's not a contractarian liberal theorist, where he will say that ultimately this is what you are supposed to be, an idea of civilized Christian nation. That is not what Hegel is talking about.
Yes, and expressive culture, because what we find today, nation, is very important for us. And Hegel's philosophy gave this organistic approach that nation is organism. And in that sense, we are expressing the whole culture as a nation. He believed that nationality is the greatest gift. It's a march of God to the earth. And the paternalistic approach, his philosophy is very paternalistic.
But as I said, that it is very important to understand, that's why he clarified. When he said that nation is the reflection of idea of God, that doesn't mean that it has to be revered in that sense. What you are revering is this reason. Okay? And in that sense, whatever this nation does, or whatever is being done in name of the state is not the right thing. So there is no kind of as if that everything done in the name of the state is right, because the state is reflection of a reason. So any deviation of that, so one can say that, so if you're opposing Vietnamese war, or US Army presence in Vietnam and all this, so you are saying that this is not what America stands for. This is not what we are. Okay? So that is an alien argument. So it is not God in the sense that whatever he does is right. That is Hitler's and Nazis' interpretation of it, and which is a problematic interpretation of it. That is important to you.
Any other question? Any question? No question? Okay.
So there are only two situations when question won't come. Either you understood everything or you understood nothing.
Or you are thinking too much.
I'm in the middle of both.
As Marx later on followed the same principle of dialectical materialism, and he was also convinced with Hegel and Hegel ideology, but he also criticized Hegel. And he quoted, I don't remember right now, maybe it's upside down or maybe the Hegel philosophy. So what was that? I just want to understand that.
I don't think that, in the sense of Marx, he was doing anything which was going against him.
So he criticized even after this. Like,
If you say specifically in what context I can be.
like for the dialectical abstractions which he discussed about that, later on Marx also followed the dialectical materialism where he also talked about thesis, antithesis and synthesis in the process of society where he talked about capitalism to communism. So he discussed about the stages, as you said, that he suggested the communism is very important, but it is a process or it is the result or outcome of the capitalism. We believe that. But he was somewhere and somehow was not convinced with the Hegel's idea. What was that? I just want to understand in detail.
Sir, as far as I understand, Hegel was not a materialist.
No.
And Karl Marx accepted his dialectics and he infused materialism into
Very
it.
simplistic reading of
That
both.
is something
That is very simplistic reading of both Hegel and Marx. Both.
I don't remember that quote. I actually read in a Marxist viewpoint where he discussed about Hegel and he said that I don't remember, like, it was
It's
like,
not coming to me.
it's upside down, maybe I'll find out and later on we'll surely discuss about that.
It's not coming to me.
Yeah.
I also heard about this.
Actually, Frederick Engels wrote a book called Dialectics of Nature.
Yes.
And the dialectics of nature is going outside dialectics of ideas. So here Hegel is developing dialectics of ideas, and Feuerbach, Engels, they are developing materialistic approach to dialectics. And Hegel is giving value to God, because God is the ultimate achievement through dialectical meandering of dialectics and achieving the God. But here we are finding that whole nature has a dialectical law. What Engels is saying, that everything is destroying and preserving itself
Right.
in the very
So
destruction.
how it will become like something against Hegel? I don't understand.
One thing which I understand is that he's written a book, Marx has written a book, critique of Hegel's idea of right. So maybe that might be something.
But my point is this, that I don't see anything which Marx is doing cannot be explained by Hegel. Or is doing something, that is my point. In what sense I'm not able to see, in what sense. Of course, there can be problem with ultimate application of everyone. For example, in case of Karl Marx, he kept on thinking that capitalism will collapse on its own contradiction, which he never realized, and that's why he was not a complete student of Hegel in that sense. Because Hegel would have said that it will reconstruct, okay, which capitalism reconstructed. So that's why he said that is not 3, actually it is 4. Because that thesis itself is synthesis, okay, and that is very important to understand. That it is, when we are saying 3, actually the thesis which you are talking about is itself a synthesis. So there is a movement. So in a way, Karl Marx was thinking that truth is static. And Hegel would be able to explain it much clearly. He will say that capitalism, it is not collapsing within its own contradiction. because there is some discovery and all those kind of things. So in that sense, pure sense, something. So, for example, in case of Zizaki, is a very interesting example. That at one point of time, Slovenia, after it broke away from where it comes, that they ended up having a currency for the time being, which was not having any name. It was having just units, 10, 20, 30, 40, 50. They say that perhaps this was a currency which was absolute Hegelian currency. As complete idea like science, mathematics, and all those kind of things. So that can be there. But in a way, I think Hegel is, of course, and that's why one can argue that when I was talking about all this, that Marx was against all this. Mao ended up writing a small kind of pamphlet on that, or a kind of monograph on contradictions. That is how he ended up justifying that why communism can still be introduced in all the societies, which may not be there. So that way it is much more, so Marx's approach is much more Hegelian approach. But he's saying that maybe in specific cases of, say, China and all those kind of things, we have some ideas on the basis of which communism can still be a possibility. So that is there. And just permutation, combination and all this, with Hegel the problem is always there that you cannot be very sure about. What Hegel himself would have done. It's just a guesswork. And all those kind of things, that is, what is right, wrong, and all those kind of things will not make much sense. Whether he would be able to even explain things like Nietzsche. For many people, he appears to be a problematic idea because when he talks about genealogical models, he's talking something like that. He's saying that, okay, what is this idea that everybody is equal? This is a construct which has been created by those people who are on the receiving end of the society. Because as a matter of fact, everybody is not equal. Some of them are stronger, some of them are taller, and all those kind of things. So everybody is not equal. So you create this construct for the purpose of what? You create this construct for the purpose of saying that if everybody is not treated equal, then there is a deviation. Okay. So this kind of things are there. This kind of construct will get created again and again, and displacement will keep on happening. And that is the beauty of the Hegel. That is a kind of an ode to Hegel, that he would be able to, and that's why he is a master philosopher. He would be able to explain so many other things which not many of other philosophers won't be able to. But again, it is again the same thing. That a person who tries to do everything would be a difficult person to understand any specific scenarios.
Okay, so with this, this session is concluded, and the next session will begin at 11:45. Okay, thank you, sir. Thank you for the wonderful lecture.